Welcome to our lesson, the introduction to HTML and XHTML and HTML5. So in this lesson, I'm gonna be teaching you every single thing that you wanted to know about HTML, XHTML, and HTML5. I will be starting with the very basics, and I'm gonna be moving into some very advanced topics. So first, XHTML. So this lesson provides a basic understanding of XHTML, its syntax, and attributes with rules for using the same along with their practical examples. It also describes the doc types, attributes, and events of XHTML. In addition, it provides a few handy tips and tricks of using XHTML. So we have the audience for the students. So this lesson is designed for the aspiring web designers and web developers who are keen to understand XHTML in detail. Enthusiastic readers can use this lesson as a source of additional reading. So we have the prerequisites. So before we proceeding with this lesson, you need to have a basic knowledge of working on Windows or Linux. You need to be familiar with any of the text editors such as Notepad, Notepad++, or Edit+. You are also required to work with browsers such as IE or Internet Explorer, Firefox, or Google Chrome comfortably. So the introduction of XHTML. XHTML stands for Extensible Hypertext Markup Language. It is the next step in the evolution of the Internet. The XHTML 1.0 is the first document type in the XHTML family. XHTML was developed by a World Wide Web Consortium or the W3C to help web developers to make the transition from HTML to XML. By migrating to XHTML today, web developers can enter the XML world with all of its benefits, while still remaining confident in the backward and future compatibility of the content. Why use XHTML? So, XHTML documents are XML conforming as they are readily viewed, edited, and validated with standard XML tools. XHTML documents can be written to operate better than they did before in existing browsers as well as in new browsers. So, XHTML documents can utilize applications such as scripts and applets that rely upon either the HTML document object model or the XML document object model. XHTML gives you a more consistent, well-structured format so that your web pages can be easily parsed and processed by present and future web browsers. You can easily maintain, edit, convert, and format your document in the long run. Since XHTML is an official standard of the W3C, your website becomes more compatible with many browsers, and it is rendered more accurately. XHTML combines strength of HTML and XML. Also, XHTML pages can be rendered by all XML-enabled browsers. So, XHTML defines quality standard for your web pages. And if you follow that, then your web pages are counted as quality web pages. The W3C certifies those pages with their quality stamp. What is HTML? So this is the HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. So this is standard generalized Generalized Markup Language or the SGML application conforming to International Standard or ISO 8879. HTML is widely regarded as the standard publishing language of the World Wide Web. What is SGML? So this is a language for describing markup languages, particularly those used in electronic document exchange, document management, and document publishing. HTML is an example of a language defined in SGML. So what is XML? XML stands for Extensible Markup Language. XML is a markup language much like HTML, and it was designed to describe data. XML tags are not predefined. You must define your own tags according to your needs. So here are the important points to remember while writing a new HTML document or converting existing HTML document into XHTML document. Write a doc type declaration at the start of the XHTML document. Write all XHTML tags and attributes in lowercase only. So close XHTML tags properly. Nest all the tags properly. Quote all the attributes values. Forbid attribute minimization. Replace the name attribute with the ID attribute. Deprecate the language attribute of the script tag. So, the doc type declaration, all XHTML documents must have a doc type declaration at the start. There are three types of doc type declarations, which are discussed in detail in XHTML doc types chapter. Here is an example of using doc type. So, case sensitivity. XHTML is case-sensitive markup language. All the XHTML tags and attributes need to be written in lowercase only. So I have here my example. So this is invalid in XHTML, and it is the correct XHTML way of writing this is as follows. So XHTML is a case-sensitive markup language. As I said earlier. So in the example, href and anchor tag are not in lowercase, so it is incorrect. Closing the tags. So each and every XHTML tag should have an equivalent closing tag. Even empty elements should also have closing tags. Here is an example showing valid and invalid ways of using tags. So this is invalid in XHTML, and this is also invalid in XHTML. So the following syntax shows the correct way of writing above tags in XHTML. So difference is that here we have closed both the tags properly. So attribute quotes. All the values of XHTML attributes must be quoted, otherwise your XHTML document is assumed as an invalid document. Here is the example showing syntax. So this is invalid in XHTML, and this is the correct way of writing this is as follows. Attribute minimization. So XHTML does not allow attribute minimization. It means you need to explicitly state the attribute and its value. The following examples shows the difference. So this is invalid in XHTML. So this one is the correct way of writing this. The ID attribute. So the ID attribute replaces the name attribute. Instead of using name equals quote name then quote, XHTML prefers to use ID equals quote ID then quote. The following example shows how. So this is invalid in XHTML and this one is the correct way of writing this. The language attribute. So the language attribute of the script tag is deprecated. And here is the example. So this is invalid in XHTML. This one is the correct way of writing. The nested tags. You must nest all the XHTML tags properly. Otherwise, your document is assumed as an incorrect HTML document. The following example shows the syntax. Element prohibitions. The following elements are not allowed to have any other element inside them. This prohibition applies to all depths of nesting, means it includes all the descending elements. So the anchor tag must not contain other anchor tag elements. So the pre tag must not contain the image tag, object tag, the all formatting tag elements. So the button tag must not contain the input, select, text area, etc. elements. Then the label must not contain other label elements. The form must not contain other form elements. A minimal XHTML document. So the following shows you a minimum content of an XHTML 1.0 document. XHTML versus HTML. So due to the fact that XHTML is an XML application, certain practices that were perfectly legal in SGML-based HTML4 must be changed. You already have seen XHTML syntax in previous chapter. So differences between XHTML and HTML are very obvious. Following is the comparison between XHTML and HTML. So XHTML documents must be well-formed. Well-formedness is a new concept introduced by XML. Essentially, this means all the elements must have closing tags and you must nest them properly. So this one is the correct and this one is incorrect. Elements and attributes must be in lowercase. XHTML documents must use lowercase for all HTML elements and attribute names. So this difference is necessary because of XHTML document is assumed to be an XML document. And XML is case sensitive. For example, the list tag and this one is the capital letter are different tags. And tags are required for all elements. So in HTML, certain elements are permitted to omit the end tag. But XML does not allow end tags to be omitted. So this one is correct and this one is incorrect. Attribute values must always be quoted. So all attribute values including numeric values must be quoted. Attribute minimization. XML does not support attribute minimization. Attribute value first must be written in full. Attribute names such as compact and check cannot occur in elements without their value being specified. Here are my example. So white space handling in attribute values. When a browser processes attributes, it does the following: strips leading and trailing white space, map sequences, map sequences of one or more white space character, including line breaks to a single word space. Script and style elements. So in XHTML, the script and style elements should not have this tag and this tag. So the characters directly. If they exist, then they are treated as the start of markup. The entities such as this tag and this tag are recognized as entity referenced by the XML processor for displaying this tag and this tag characters respectively. Wrapping the content of the script or style element within a CData mark section avoids the expansion of these entities. The elements in ID with ID and name attributes. So XHTML recommends the replacement of name attribute with ID attribute. Note that in XHTML 1.0, the name attribute of these elements is formally deprecated, and it will be removed in a subsequent version of XHTML. Attributes with predefined value sets. So the XHTML HTML and XHTML both have some attributes that have predefined and limited sets of values. For example, type attribute of the input element in HTML and XML. These are called enumerated attributes. Under HTML4, the interpretation of these values was case insensitive. So value of text was equivalent to a value of text. Under XHTML, the interpretation of these values is case sensitive, so all of these values are defined in lowercase. Entity reference as hex values. So HTML and XML both permit references to characters by using hexadecimal value. In HTML, these references could be made using either ampersand dash XNN or ampersand hash. This one is the capital letter and this one is small letter. And they are valid, but in XHTML documents, you must use the lowercase version only, such as this. The HTML element is a must. All XHTML elements must be nested within the HTML root element. All other elements can have sub-elements which must be in pairs and correctly nested within their parent element. The basic document structure is this: the doc tag HTML, the HTML tag, the head tag, the body tag, and the closing HTML tag. So we have HTML. So what is HTML? So HTML stands for the Hypertext Markup Language. HTML describes the structure of web pages using markup. HTML elements are the building blocks of HTML pages. HTML elements are represented by tags. HTML tags label pieces of contents such as heading, paragraph, table, and so on. Browsers do not display the HTML tags but use them to render the content of the page. So I have here the simple document of HTML. So the doc type HTML declaration defines this document to be HTML5. So the HTML element is the root element of the page. The head element contains meta information about the document. The title element specifies the title for the document. The body element contains the visible page content. The heading element defines a large heading. The paragraph element defines a paragraph. So HTML tags. HTML tags are element names surrounded by angle brackets. So this one is an example of HTML tags. So HTML tags normally comes in pairs like the paragraph tag. The first tag is the start tag and the second tag is the end tag. The end tag is written like the start tag but the forward slash inserted before the tag name. So we have the browsers. Then you open your file and save it and save as .html. The browser has its role to render it and display the content of your code. So the purpose of a web browser is to read HTML documents and display them. The browser does not display the HTML tags but uses them to determine how to display the document. The doc type declaration. So the doc type declaration represents the document type and helps browsers to display web pages correctly. It must only appear once at the top of the page before any HTML tags. The doc type declaration is not case sensitive and when you begin, you have to know the editors. So writing HTML using Notepad or TextEdit, web pages can created and modified by using professional HTML editors. However, for learning HTML, we recommend a simple text editor like Notepad. That's one I'm using. Or TextEdit for the Mac. We believe using a simple text editor is a good way to learn HTML. So, don't worry if these examples use tags you have not learned. You will learn about them in the next lesson. So, the HTML documents must start with the document type declaration doctype.html. The HTML document itself begins with HTML and ends with closing HTML tag. So the visible part of the HTML document is between the body element. So HTML headings. So headings are defined with the H1 to H6 tags. So the H1 defines the most important heading and the H6 defines the least important heading. So I will type the H1 to H6 tags. Then save and reload your browser. You can see from the bigger one to the smallest one. So this is the H1, the H2, H3, H4, H5, and then H6. We have the HTML paragraphs. So I will delete this. So the paragraphs are defined with the tag like this, the P tag. So this is the paragraph tag. So HTML have elements. HTML element usually consists of the start tag and the end tag, with the content inserted in between. So for example, this is the tag name, this is the content, and this is the end tag. The HTML element is everything from the start tag to the end tag. HTML elements can be nested. All HTML documents consist of nested elements. So for example, this 2 is the nested elements. We have the two tags elements here. So the HTML element defines the whole document. It has a start tag HTML and an end tag HTML. The element content is another element. It is the body element. Defines the document body. It has a start tag body and an end tag body. The element content is two other HTML elements, is the H1 elements and the paragraph elements. So do not forget the end tag. Some HTML elements will display correctly even if you forget the end tag. We have the empty HTML elements. So HTML elements with no content are called empty elements. So the line break is an empty element without a closing tag. Empty elements can be closed in the opening tag like this. So HTML5 does not require empty elements to be closed, but if you want stricter validation or if you need to make your document readable by XML parsers, you must close all HTML elements properly. We have the attributes. So this provide additional information about HTML elements. All HTML elements can have attributes. So attributes provide additional information about an element. So attributes are always specified in the start tag. Attributes usually come in name or value pairs, like name equals to quote value, then quote. We have the lang attribute. So en represents the language, English. So the language of the document can be declared in the HTML tag. So the language is declared with the lang attribute. So the first two letters, this one, specify the language, or if there's a dialect, use two more letters, the US. We have the title attribute. A title attribute is added to the paragraph element. The value of the title attribute will be displayed as a tooltip when you mouse over the paragraph. So, like for example, title. So when you run this in the browser, the square, the little square will pop up when you mouse over the paragraph. So I suggest that HTML5 standard does not require lowercase attributes. Name. The title attribute can be written with uppercase or lowercase, like title, or like this, or it all caps. So right now we had we have to add styles in an HTML document. So the HTML style attribute, setting the style of an HTML can be done with the style attribute. The HTML attribute has the following syntax. So for example, the tag name equals, or I'm sorry, style and quote, then the property value. So the property is a CSS property. The value is a CSS value. You will learn more about CSS later in this lesson. So HTML background color. So we add the color of the background in the body. So the body style, then enter the background color, then enter its value, then save and reload your browser. You can see the background changes its color. So the color property defines the text color for an HTML document or element. So the same as the body, we need to add style in the text of our headings. Then save, reload. We have the HTML fonts. The font family property defines the font to be used for an HTML element. So, like for example, erase this, then enter the font family, then save, reload. Next, we have the HTML text size. So, the font size property defines the text size for an HTML element. So, I will change this into style. Then, quote, font size into 300%. Then save after you enter the code. Then reload. So you can see the paragraph will be a lot more bigger. We have the text alignment. So the text align property defines the horizontal text alignment for an HTML element. So change this into text align. Then center. Save your work. Then reload. Next, we have the text formatting. So I'll explain the 10 text formatting attribute. So HTML also defines special elements for defining text with special meaning. HTML uses like the bold and italicized for formatting output, like bold or italic text. Formatting elements were designed to display special types of text. So first, I will write the bold text. Then save, reload. This is the bold text. Then we have the strong attribute. The next one, we have the italic text. Next, we have the emphasized text. Then, we have, I forgot to change this. We have the mark text. Next, we have the small text. Then we have the deleted text. Next one is the inserted text. The subscript text. And the superscript text. So, first, I will explain the bold element. So, it defines the bold text without any extra importance. And the strong text, So this is element defines strong text with added semantic strong importance. We have the italic text. So it defines the italic text without any extra importance. The emphasize element defines emphasized text with with added semantic importance. The small element, so it defines the smaller text. The mark text or mark element defines mark or highlighted text. The deleted text or element defines the deleted or removed text. The inserted text defines or the inserted element defines inserted or added text. The subscript element, so it defines the subscripted text. And the superscript text or element defines superscripted text. So, using HTML5 today, HTML5 is an odd mix of things that work right now, things that work in some browsers, and the new cutting edge techniques that won't work until tomorrow or the day after. Additionally, some of the elements have undergone a change in their semantic meaning. When it comes to browser compatibility, which all web designers should have in mind when think of HTML5's features as divided into three main categories. So features that already work, this is features that are very well supported but wasn't a part of the old official HTML. This also includes the semantic elements we will look at in later chapters, such as the article elements, the aside element, the nav element, and so forth. So, so how do we know if the HTML5 feature you are about to implement is going to work? So, well, the browser vendors are the ones to decide whether or not a specific features works. As there are about 4 or 5 major browser vendors, it is going to the uphill testing the feature yourself on all browsers and their different editions. So, luckily, there are the other people who do this work for you. They test almost every single one of the new features and the test the compatibility a long way back, version wise and on every mainstream browser. So, we now start to HTML5 semantics. HTML5 elements, I mean. So, HTML5 have introduced a lot of new elements to make the HTML markup language even more semantic. In order to get a better understanding of how these elements are supposed to be used, I decided to use the same example throughout this part of the lesson. So it is an article about flour, which I have borrowed from All Recipes. Before continuing on the rest of the lesson, you should have a quick look at how the article markup could have looked before the use of HTML5 elements. There are a lot of div elements, and I will show you when this div can be replaced with more semantically correct markup. The new HTML5 elements can be used in different ways, and it is important to notice that even though I have tried to include as many views on how to use them as possible, the use of the elements is not definitive yet. This means that I might state that content inside the article element is supposed to make sense on its own. But this is my understanding of HTML5 specification, and even though I have tried to present the most recognized use of the elements, you might read other uh, articles that disagreed with my reading of the HTML5 specification. So this means that I very often will write one, two, or even three different views or on how to use the new elements. But do not let this scare you away from you using the new elements. You future-proof your web pages, and this is always a good thing. Additionally, don't want it to become a habit to use the div elements to everything, as this way of marking up your documents is a dying way of doing this. So first, the article tag. The article element is one of the new elements that have been introduced with HTML5. As this new element, there has been some confusion of how to use this element, but there seems to be an agreement that you use the article element when you mark up content that makes sense on its own. What does this mean? So it means that you could use the article element when marking up an about me page, a blog entry, and also every comment to your blog entry. But you are not supposed to use the article element around every single paragraph. The point is, whatever you put in the article element, it is supposed to make sense on its own. Using the article, the article element should be used like this. So I have the examples here. You can see it's all about plar, the heading, and I open it in the browser. The article element contains the div ID header and the div ID content. As the content in these two div can be read as a whole article. I have not included the div ID footer as the content in this element has nothing to do with the actual article. We still use a lot of div elements in this example, but I will show you in the following lessons which new HTML5 elements you should use instead. Sometimes you need more than just one example, and I included another using the blog entry example from previous lesson. You would use the article element to wrap each blog entry like this. So I have another one example. Just like that. So what you have learned. The article is a new semantic of HTML5 element. Then the article should be used when the content would make sense on its own. Example in the CSS reader. So the article is a very specific element, more specific than example the div element. So let's now move in to the header element. So the header element is a bit ambiguous as it can be used in different kinds of ways. Firstly, you need to know that the header element do not Do not introduce a new section. It is a head of an existing section. Secondly, you must not confuse it with the head element. It is two different elements. So you can have two header elements on the same page. So imagine you have 3 blog entries on a single page. Well, they can all have a header section. Header section. So multiple articles on one page. They all have their own header element. Using the plar article, this means that the div element we previously used to divide the headline and author from the rest of the content can now be replaced by the header element. So, when using the header element, you should always have one heading tag from age 1 to age 6. But you can have multiple. You can also use the age group element, which I will explain later on. Lastly, you can also have other header relevant content such as the byline, publication date, table of contents, etc. So you have the two headings. For example, this same as the one we created, but it has the publication date. So what you have learned, header is a new semantic HTML5 element. So the header is used inside the section. Therefore, you can have multiple header in the same document. So let's now proceed with the age group element. So the age group is a second level element used to wrap one or more heading elements from age 1 to age 6, such as the title and subheading, as the age group is only allowed to contain heading elements. So some examples might be the easiest way to show when the and where the age group should be used. So when there is just one little title, there is no need for the age group element. So an article with title and metadata, still there is just one title, so even though there is some metadata about the article, the age group element is not relevant. So I have the example here. This is how we do this code. So an article with title and subtitle, now we have two titles, so we can use the age group element. So this is my example in using the age group. You can see in this browser we have the two headings. That's why we use the age group tag. So an article with title, subtitle, and metadata, when we have several title and metadata, the age group element only contains the actual titles, which should be marked up with the age 1 true H6 elements. This is my example in article with title, subtitle, and metadata. So if I open this in browser, you can see there are two headings that are grouped in the age group tags, and the one is for the publishing date. So what you have learned, the age group element is always inside the header element. So the age group element only contains headings such as subtitles or tag lines, which are marked up with the age 1 through age 6 elements. All other header relevant content should be outside of the age group element. So let's now proceed to the footer element. You are probably used to seeing footers on websites all the time. So they usually contain copyright stuff, a few selected navigational links, and maybe contact information. Just like the header element, the footer element does not introduce a new section in your document, but is the last part of that specific section, whether it can be an article section or some other section. So this is my example for the footer. So this means that you can have multiple footers on the same page. If you have several blog entries in one page, every blog entry can have its own footer and the page itself can have its own footer too. Using the article as an example, you could use the footer element like this. So I will now redirected in the all recipes. So if your footer contains nothing but the links, the footer tag should be used this way. Nothing but this. And what should the footer contain? Content that is related to the sections. Content but not part of the actual content. Regarding blog entries, the footer might be where you have your related entries, comments, Facebook like buttons, and publication date if you do not have this in the header section. So, the footer is always the last part of a given section, not necessarily the document. The footer element is nested inside its parent element. Therefore, you can have several footers in the same document. The footer usually contains information about its section as an author, just like my example here. The footer element is a block level element. So we now move into the section element. So the section element is one of the new elements that it is the hardest to learn to use correctly. It is more general than the article element. But you still have to have an actual section in your document when you use the section element. So this means that you should always consider whether or not it might be more appropriate to use the navigation element, the aside element, the header element, the footer element, or the article element before actually using the section element. Some of these elements might be new to you. There is lessons discussing all of them. So let's take a look at how you could use the section element to divide the different parts of the flyer articles into sections. So this is my example, and as you can see, if I open this in the browser, this adds several lines of markup to your document, and some prefer as little markup as possible. Luckily for them, you do not need to use the section element inside the article, but it often creates a more correct document outline. As the section element divides your content into sections, it is important to remember that all section elements must be followed by a heading tag. So, if this doesn't make sense semantically, then you should not be using the section element. Consider using the one of the other new semantic HTML5 elements, or perhaps no element at all. So, the section element is not supposed to be used as styling hook. So, if you do not need a styling hook, use a div element. The section element should always be your last choice. Make sure there is no other element that is more relevant. Do use it to divide a lengthy terms and condition page into numbered section. Use the section element to groups of content. Example, a collection of articles on a news site. So don't use the section for quotes and sidebars. Use the aside element instead. If your section isn't directly followed by a heading element H1 to H6, then the section element is not what you need. So we're now move into the aside element. So the side element is new HTML5, and it can be used into different contexts. So basically, the context of the aside element is based on whether or not inside or outside the article element. So I have here the example. The side element can only be used to mark up content which is relevant to your page as a whole, containing blog rolls, additional navigation, even ads. And when this is the scope of your aside element, it has to be placed outside of this article section. So this is the example. So whether you use the aside element for the former or the latter use, you need to remember that the aside element is for secondary content regardless of the visual design of this content. So the side element can be used within or outside the article element. When you use inside the content of the side element must be relevant to the article content. If you can remove the content of the aside element and the article content to which it is relevant becomes incomplete, then you should not be using the aside element. So when you're using the aside element, the content of the aside element must be relevant on your entire web page. The side element is a block level element. So next we have the address element. So these are the address. This is one of the new HTML5 elements that are actually almost as straightforward as it seems. The two most important things to have in mind are that the address element relates to the element in which it is nested, and that it has to be directly related to this section. So here are the examples. So the address element can only be used to indicate authors of sections of your document. So I click this in the browser, just like that. This is by addressing the author of the section. And just to make sure, below is an example of how we should. I have another example here. So to mark up postal addresses, and there is an exception unless of course the postal addresses is in fact the relevant contact information of the specific document or part of the document. So when I click this in the browser, it goes like this. So the address element is used to mark up the author of the document or the specific section of the document. The address element will typically be used in the header or the footer. So let's now move into creating forms in HTML5. So a form is simply an area that contains from fields. A form is a field and is an object which the user can add information to, whether it be a text area or a radio button or a drop-down menu. Any web form essentially works the same way. The user fills in some information and submits a button. So the form, I have the example. So the form is essential if you want to know anything about your user. Example, have them send you a mail, store information about them in your database, and so forth. So how does an HTML form work? So a web form consists two parts, the HTML front end and the back end form processor. The HTML front end part handles the presentation while the back end handles the form submission. The back end of the form is usually written in languages like PHP or ASP. But don't worry, you don't have to know any of these language to get a working form. You can use a form mail, which is usually accessible through your internet service provider. So a user visits your web page which contains a form. The user web browser displays the HTML form. The user fills out the form and clicks submit. The browser sends the submitted form data to the web server. A form processor script running on the server processes the form data. So a response page is sent back to the browser. So let's now create our first form. So for example, I have here, I don't use the standard HTML because it run like this. So the form tag contains the content of your form. This content is called form widgets, controls, or fields. They all describe the same thing. This content is mostly different kinds of input fields and a button here and there. Let's take a look at a very simple form with just two input fields and submit button. So I have here the example. As you can see, the input fields are defined by the input element. The input element represents a type data field which the user can edit. You can edit. So the type attribute defines which input state you are using. In this case, a regular text element and the name attribute denominates the individual input fields. The type attribute is the master switch that determines what the input element really is. So the button is also defined using the input element, but the value of the type attribute is submit. As opposed to text in the two previous fields, and this indicates that this is a submit button. The submit button has an additional attribute. The value of the attribute defines what the button is going to say, and for example, I choose submit now. As you have probably noted by now, the input element is an empty element, and therefore it is self-closing using the slash at the end. This is slash at the end. So I have a tip for you students. So it is always nice when you have the possibility to shorten your markup without promising on the quality, and you have the opportunity when you create regular text input fields in your form. You can omit the type attribute and the browser will automatically interpret the input field as a regular text field. That means that the two following input elements get treated exactly the same. So let's now move in to another element. So if you have a longer form, it can be very handy to group the different kinds of fields. To do this, you use the field set element. The name of the group is given by the first legend element, which is the child of the field set element. Once we are at it, I want to introduce yet another element, the label element. So the label is used to add a caption to each piece of element you are collecting. So I have example already. So I open it in the browser. Now we have the field set, and it group the input types. So why do we use the field set? So imagine you wanted to add something to this form, perhaps favorite foods. Then you would group the different kind of food in a new field set and gives clarity to your form. So I have also added the attribute ID to input field. This defines the element's unique identifier, and we use it when we are assigning labels. Using the for attribute, we connect to the input field and the label. So let's now move into another element, creating form. So until now, we have not discussed how to actually send the data entered by the user. You can either send it to your email address, to another page, or to your database. Whichever options you choose, I choose the email. So this is defined through the method attribute, which can have one of two values, post or get. So the get values ensures that the data is to be encoded by the browser into a URL. And post means that the data is sent to a database or your email. So this means that generally you will use the post value as it is used for form submission. The easiest way to handle your data is to send it to your email. All you have to do is to add the action attribute to the form element and the method attribute. The action attribute tells the browser what to do with the content of your form, and the method attribute tells the browser how to handle it. So here is the example. Right now it can't work because we're not using any local host. So if you choose this method, you need to be aware that the functionality depends on the email client installed on your user's computer. This means that not all users will be able to use your form. Otherwise, you could use the form mail, which I mentioned earlier. When using a form mail, the value of the method attribute should always be paused as you are sending the data. So we have the multi-line text boxes, the text area tag. Sometimes you need to give the visitor the opportunity to enter more than just a few characters. And this is what the text area element is for. Just as you can define the length of a text input field, you have the option to change the size of your text area using the attributes rows and columns. For this example, I chosen a text area which is 25 columns wide and 7 rows high. So this is the example I created. So in using the radio buttons, although radio button is the perfect choice of input field when you have some preset values that the user must choose between, but you want to limit their options to just one answer, the structure is the same as with the checkboxes. All radio buttons with the same name are one group, and the user can only choose one radio button within a group. So I enter the question here and the choices that the user can choose from. The value attribute defines the string that is being sent to your email, to the database, or however you choose the input. So radio buttons is a suitable choice when you want to present a lot of options to the user. But at the same time, make sure they choose just one. So this example, choose just one. So the user this example shows the user how you force the visitor to choose just one of their favorite pets. And other than that, we have the checkboxes. So using checkboxes is a good option when you want to give your visitor the option to choose several units within a group of choices. Unlike the radio buttons, the users can only choose one choices. So the type attribute must have the value checkbox. And then you have to make sure that every checkbox within the same group have the same name. The value attribute is the string that is being sent to your email, to the database, or however you choose the input to use the input. So checkboxes is a suitable choices when you want to present a lot of options to the user and give them the opportunity to choose one or more items. So I have the example here. So here the user can choose many options. Now we do the submit and reset buttons. So buttons are defined by changing the input elements type attribute. There is two different kinds of buttons, the submit button and the reset button. The submit button is used whenever you want to submit a form and the markup looks like this. The reset button is used to clear all inputs by the user and the markup looks like this. So here is a sample form with the both submit button and reset button. When you have entered and you want to clear the form, just click clear form. So the submit button must be always at the last value selected, as it initiates the form submission, whereas the reset button can be pressed at all times during the form fill out. And lastly, from the form, we have the drop down list. So the drop down list is another way to give the user opportunity to choose just one of a series of choices when you would use the drop down list. As the first item on the list is normally the default choice. This is the default choice. So using the drop down list can be a good choice when you know that a specific option is often chosen over the other options. The drop-down list should only be used when the user has to choose between the options, as the drop-down list does not give the user opportunity not to choose anything, such as radio buttons do. So I have example here. If you want another item to be selected instead of the first one on the list, use the selected attribute. HTML5 allows you to shorten your markup when using the selected attribute. So instead of writing, you can use these options. So let's now proceed to form validation using HTML5. So the fields in a form are there to gather information from your visitors. But no matter how much time you spend setting up your form, there is going to be at least some of your visitors who gets confused filling out your form, might skip important parts of your form, the type invalid values, and the result. So this is where validation enters. If you validate your input fields before the data is sent to your inbox or database, then the visitor gets a chance to correct the data. And this means that the chance of you getting the data you actually ask for improves. So how HTML5 validation works? So the basic idea behind HTML5 validation is that you tell the browser which fields you want validated, but don't actually do the tedious implementation yourself. As you define what state your input field is in, you also ask the browser to validate the field client side based on the type of input field. Unfortunately, not all modern browsers understand this new way of validating forms, but don't worry. If you are using a type value the browser doesn't recognize, it will just treat it as a regular text field and no harm has been done. So I have the example here. If you click submit now and you don't have entered any text in the input field, the message warning will show. So using this required attribute, the browser informs the user that she has or he has to fill out this particular field before submitting the form. So the required attribute to not take into consideration what kinds of data are typed into the input fields, but you don't have the opportunity to do with this with some of the following input types. That's Now let's go have a look at them in the following lessons. So first, we have the validating email address. So one of the new values of the type attribute is email. So using this field instead of the regular text field, the browser uses a regular expression to check that the user has in fact typed in an email address. So when using patterns to validate email address, another way to validate email address is to use pattern attribute. As mentioned in the chapter about patterns, the pattern can be anything on you specify and it based on regular expressions. I will not go further into the subject or regular expression as this is a very comprehensive subject. All you need to is is to use patterns to validate email address is which pattern to use. As you can see, the pattern is pretty intricate, but basically it checks whether or not the user input looks like a normal email address, such as my email. So if you input the wrong pattern, the input and the submit button will not get it. So when you put the correct pattern, and then we have the validating URLs in forms using HTML5. So if you ask what constitutes a valid URL, you will most definitely get different answers depending on who you ask. So luckily, we can improve the URL validation input type by adding the pattern attribute to our input field. So the pattern attribute accepts JavaScript regular expressions, or if you're not familiar with regular expressions, all you need to know by now is that you can add the following attribute. So I will use the HTTP. So now it entered our input URL. So we now move in to validating phone numbers using HTML5. So one of the reasons this input type have no pattern might be the fact that phone numbers differs. This is my code I created. So this should not prevent you from using this input type as it makes your markup more semantically correct and future proofs your website. One of the other great things about this input type is the most smartphones changes the keyboard from the regular QWERTY keyboard to a number pad, and this really improves the user experience. And then we have the validating dates. HTML5 gives you different opportunities to validate dates. The browsers that understand the date element provide your user with handy drop-down calendars to pick the dates from. So this prevents your users from understanding the date format or deliberately to pick correct or non-existing dates. So the format for the date type is the year, the month, and the date, which means that November 7, 2016 with be rendered. This is a classic choice for anything from vacation dates for delivery dates. And now we proceed to the month. So the format for the month is this. You can choose either November 2016 and click check. So other than that, we have the week format. So sometimes all you need is a week, and the format for the week type is the year, the week. So which means that week 12 in 2012 would be rendered 2012-W12. Week 12. So we have the time. Sometimes you need a specific time, and the time type is rendered just like this. So this means that time is it 4:15 a.m. would be rendered. And lastly, we have the date and time. So the date and time has a long format: the year, the month, the date, the hours, the minutes, and the seconds. So what you have learned, this is several different ways of validating dates. So the date attribute support is of right now very sparse, and therefore you should consider using a polyfill to support it. So we now move into the placeholder text. So an empty form might be a bit intimidating, especially if you are uncertain of what might go into the different input fields. Therefore, some developers invented the idea of a sample text inside the fields, so the other user would have an idea of what to type in. This is what we need nowadays, called the placeholder text. So the placeholder attribute actually has a pretty great support across browsers, but if your user uses a browser that does not support the new HTML5 attribute, no harm is done. The browser will just ignore your placeholder text. And of course, you can use polyfill to make sure that the placeholder text is shown in all browsers. So at the very last, numbers as spin boxes. So another take on validating the input from your users is using the number attribute. There are many situations where you might need the user to pick a number, and even though it seems pretty straightforward, it's not. Look at it this way. If I ask you to pick a number, you would might say -5 or 5, but I meant a number from 1 to 10. Can you choose 3.75? I say you're just being argumentative, as you should have known I meant a whole number. So as you can see, a number is not just a number, and normally you have some implied boundaries. So if you try to go beyond the specified range, some browsers will gray out the arrows, while others just won't allow you to go any further. So that's all. An introduction to XHTML and HTML5. Hope you learned something from it. Thank you.